All right. Welcome to another edition of Sabbath Lounge. This is Matt
and Jake here.
And today we're going to talk to you about what?
Torah. We're talking Torah.
Talking Torah. Yep. Talking Torah with Sabbath Lounge, and we appreciate you being here. And we'd appreciate if you'd subscribe. There is literally a button here. I think I've said that before, and there's never a thing.
Yeah.
Now there is actually a button.
We got to point this way because we're there. Okay.
I'm glad you're good at spatial patterns.
You gotta use your mirrored vision.
Mirrored vision. So we're going to talk about Shemot.
Shemot. Names. Yeah. Week 13.
What do you think it's called names?
I think they bring up a bunch of names of people, like right off the bat, in this Torah portion. Right?
Yeah.
So this is our overview of week 13. High-end look at some things that maybe we picked out, maybe we learned, maybe you could learn from this Torah portion, Exodus chapter 1, just starting through chapter 6, verse 1.
You could say the 1,000-foot view.
Yes.
If you wanted to be cliche.
And we don't, so we won't say that.
We won't say that.
We won't say, but
forget I said that.
This is a 1,000-foot view here.
Yes. So we're going to go take a look at this. Remember, we're just trying to glance over it, and we want you to go back and read it if you haven't read it.
That's kind of the point. We're not reading it for you.
All right, so one of the first things we're going to look at is...
Here, read this for the people.
Read this? Okay. Genesis 15:18. On that day, Yahweh made a covenant with Abram and said, to your descendants, give this land from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates.
What's the river of Egypt?
And so we talked about that, and we did some research, and so we looked at the Nile River, and the Nile is it the longest river?
That's what they tell me.
Is it the Amazon?
I mean, I haven't gotten my measuring stick out, so...
So it's definitely up there for sure. And it probably depends on how you count them. We figured that out. It depends on how you want to measure the Nile because it has some tributaries, just like here in Texas. The Red River has the Pease River runs into it. And
you don't want to eat fish out of that.
Yeah, no. And then the Red River is a tributary to the Mississippi. And but the Nile has some tributaries, and one of the tributaries is the White Nile, but it was also called something else somewhere. What was
Victoria Nile?
It comes out of Lake Victoria in Africa and runs north, which, not as many rivers run north.
Right.
In my experience.
Because south is down on the map, so.
Yes, that's right. But for sure it's true in Texas. Like all the rivers in Texas run south except for a handful.
Are there actual rivers in Texas?
That's hurtful.
Are they all man-made?
That's hurtful, Jake.
That's lakes or ponds. Or
no, there are real rivers. You just have to go down like Austin, San Antonio, and you'll see rivers. Okay, but we don't have any. Not many in the North Texas area. But anyway. So it's just interesting that we all think of the little red sliver there, don't we?
Yes.
The Promised Land.
That's all we're thinking about.
And what do you think that is? What do you think that is?
I think it's because that's where it is now, kind of.
Well, and don't you think that it always was the choice land?
Yeah, I think that's like the breadbasket.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was the desirable. I mean, that's the expensive real estate. I mean, you think about it, how much... do you think, if I can take my cursor, if you can see that, what's land price out here in this desert versus land price right up here on the coast?
I haven't been checking that lately.
Yeah,
but
either. Go to Zillow and check that out. If you got an address down there, I'm sure you could find out.
Yeah.
Probably not.
There's probably some huts there.
Maybe. But I would imagine the land here in the desert is really cheap.
Yeah.
Versus a Mediterranean coastal community.
So we're telling you, go buy land there now.
Oh,
in preparation.
Idea. Good idea.
And you'll be the first in line.
Yes, first in line. But it is interesting just to think about that technically. So we're going to talk about Midian, and we're going to talk about Jethro and the land of Goshen, and kind of where some of these things are, and technically everything over here by the Nile was already in the Promised Land.
Yeah. So, Matt, why don't you tell us why the border drawn here has this insanely straight line?
It's kind of like a bell or something.
Yeah.
Yes, we thought that was weird. So we started going, well, why is that? I don't think that would be like that. And so because the definition here says Egypt to the great river Euphrates, the Euphrates currently runs, through Iraq here and ends up at, that's the Gulf, the hotly contested Persian Gulf, that is. And so, we talked about how in the United States, the Mississippi River, at the mouth of the river there in Louisiana, we don't say the Mississippi continues to run through the Gulf.
Right.
And then it depends on where you draw the Nile over there. Can I exit that? What happens if I exit that? Nope, I don't want to do that.
Don't do that. It'll go away.
Yeah.
So yeah, it comes down to where the Nile starts.
The official Nile.
Yeah. And so it says in the verse, all the land from the river of Egypt, the Nile, to the Euphrates. So all the land in between there. So a lot of people, they'll draw this line from the straight line from the Nile to the Euphrates. But we've also seen maps that take this whole area of Saudi Arabia and Oman and Yemen, and they include all that as part of the land. And some of this stuff here in Egypt or in Africa.
Yeah, they take it all the way to the water.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But, it is interesting to, we don't often think about the Saudi Arabia connection much. And we also don't think and talk about the Africa connection, very much. But, they're in Africa, we think of it, I think, sometimes being more European, but definitely, Africa is right there.
Yep.
So anyway, study that out. See what you think about the original land grant versus what we see today. But people get all in a knot today about this piece of land, and people talk about the temple and the red heifer, and they can get so bent out of shape. And I think they are missing the point. Yes, there is a modern country named Israel, but it is not the Israel that you and I belong to.
Right.
Not necessarily. It's not the same, necessarily the same thing.
Exactly.
Name the same.
Name same.
All right, so let's talk about Moses. Moses moves to Midian. And so there's some scriptures there. And so, why Midian? Who's in Midian?
There's this guy named Jethro down there.
That's right. So Jethro.
I think he played the flute, right?
Jethro played the flute.
Jethro Tull.
Oh, Jethro Tull. Very good.
Jamming on that flute. Man.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
Yes. So you've got the identification of the land of Goshen, which is, kind of over here. And
choice land.
Yep, choice land in Egypt. And so it shows you that in a lot of ways, Moses' journey parallels the journey that he takes people on. So, I don't think there's any coincidence that Moses goes and spends time in the desert.
Right around Mount Sinai.
And then has to send a bunch of people over there. So, he knew he was a good guide. He knew the land. It wasn't like he was going in here blind.
Right. And lost wandering the desert for 40 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he probably knew where he was the whole time.
Yeah.
Which is a good point.
Which would probably be frustrating. Yeah. More frustrating to him.
So we want to go into...
Right there.
That's right. Go into a little bit more detail of... Jethro and Moses' relations, and then actually, as I'm reading this, Havilah, isn't that the land where there was gold? I think I've read that before. Maybe in Genesis it says that. You should go look that up. Okay, so in the King James Bible, so how do we get to this guy Jethro? Well, Chronicles things.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yes. And would you read 1 Chronicles 1:22?
Now the sons of Keturah, Abraham's concubine, she bare Zimran and Jokshan and Medan and Midian and Ishbak and Shua, and the sons of Jokshan, Sheba and Dedan.
All right, so who is this Keturah lady spoken of here?
This is Abraham's concubine.
Yes, some people
say a third
say,
wife of Abraham.
Yeah, some people just say wife after Sarah has died.
Yes.
And so after Sarah dies, he marries this other lady, and they have children. Abraham is old, but still having children. So, and one
She
of
must
these
not have been that old.
maybe not. And one of these,
Not necessarily.
yes, could have been old. One of these is Midian.
Yes.
And so, because we are talking about really old ancient people, sometimes you get things named after you.
Yeah.
And especially if you're Midian, you get a whole area named after you. And so that is the land of Midian. And so this is a timeline. What is this? Family tree showing you had Abraham and Sarah. She dies. And then you have Abraham, Hagar. You get the Ishmaelites. And then you have the line of Keturah. And Midian is there. And then eventually you come down and you find Jethro. And Jethro becomes the father-in-law of Moses, has a daughter named Zipporah.
Yes. I just think it's interesting. You see this family tree from Midian to Jethro. Not a lot of branches on there, Matt.
No. Not too complicated. But also, there's just a lot there we don't know.
Yeah.
Or it's lost to history, or it hasn't been found yet.
Right.
So, but it doesn't make the story not true to me, for sure. Just because I don't know all the missing pieces there. But that kind of explains who this is. And so I think what you see here is you also go, okay, so what tribe did the priests come from? Well, of course they come from Levi. And so you definitely have this Levite priesthood. And what do you know? Moses is a Levi.
He is a Levi.
And what did it say about Levites later on in the Torah? Moses wrote that Levites, who could they marry?
They could marry of the priestly family.
That's right. And so Moses does that. And so, there was a time when I read through some of this and I was like, this guy, so all of you probably have gone down this path where everything's pagan. You pick up a rock and you're like, oh, that's pagan. Everything is pagan. And so when I saw that
pet rocks are pagan.
Yes, pet rocks. What about a rock concert? rocks glued on a piece of board and it says rock concert.
Oh,
that's really old.
Super pagan.
So anyway, Jethro.
Yeah, so when they say Jethro is a priest, we automatically go, oh, pagan priest.
Yep. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I bet that guy was pagan. He probably did idols.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily true. I think it makes a lot of sense that he was a legitimate priest, but he wasn't the Aaronic priesthood. He wasn't out of that lineage. He's more of like the Melchizedek priest line. And so that makes a lot of sense that Moses would have married another, someone in the priest lineage.
So then you might say that, nah, you might not. Never mind. I'm not going to follow up on that.
So anyway, I think it's worth studying up and reaching your own conclusion on. And so, who is Jethro? So Jethro was a Midianite. What's a Midianite?
Someone from Midian. One of the sons of Midian.
And they were considered nomadic tribe people.
Yeah.
Living in the desert. And so, did they live in Egypt?
I'm sure their paths went around the area. They weren't in Egypt proper, as you might say.
Right. And so, it says they were metalsmiths. I got this all from Britannica or someplace like that. But Jethro was the father-in-law of Moses. He's a Kenite and a priest leader, which is the Kenites are important later, which is kind of interesting. But there are lots of things here to track down. If you've never looked at the Kenites, if you've never looked at the Melchizedek priest line, those are all things you should consider here. And but anyway,
I think the understanding here is interesting. How they say, he was the priest leader of the tribe that he led in the worship of Yahweh. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, and that's the Britannica people saying that. So, I do think it's worthy to consider. It makes sense that he was a legitimate priest, and he knew Torah, and he this is before Torah, but he knew the father. He had a relationship.
Yeah.
He's not just some rando that Moses runs into and befriends, and
Right.
feels sorry for Moses.
And if he wasn't, if he was some pagan priest, he's giving Moses later on, as you'll see, as we keep up with the portions, that he's giving Moses advice on how to run the Israelite camp.
Yeah.
And I don't think Yahweh really deals well with that kind of thing if it's from like a pagan root.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that kind of is a feather in Jethro's cap.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely doesn't fit. So anyway, so another interesting thing about Jethro, and as we talked about it, so Jake, what did we say? What was our theory behind why does Jethro end up kind of close to Egypt?
Well, that would be kind of a place where he could be, on his own. He's like homesteading in the rural areas.
Yeah.
And but he can run into town if he needs to build up his supplies.
Yeah.
And it kind of makes sense that they probably did that.
Do you think he was affected by the famine that we read about in Joseph? Is that a possibility?
Well, that would be 400 some years prior. Mm. But I'm sure his family lineage was, and, being nomadic, probably went into town in Egypt. And, this was a place that the Midianites could establish themselves, but still make it into Egypt to get that grain.
Yeah.
Get that grain.
Yeah, it's like a suburb. He commuted.
Yeah.
But I do think it's important to look at, he never technically sold out to the Egyptians. And so, we right now, a lot of us are thinking we're in Egypt, which I believe is absolutely correct. We're in Egypt, and we are going to be led out in the second Exodus. And, there's a greater Exodus coming. But Jethro, he didn't have to have an Exodus. Technically, he was already living in, quote unquote, the promised land, and he wasn't in bondage, and he wasn't in slavery.
And he doesn't go with them when they leave. He just, okay, I'm going back home.
Yeah. And it's kind of weird. It's like, well, why wouldn't he want to be a part of the group? But he was in a different place.
I think it's because we have a narrow view of what the promised land was.
Exactly. We have a narrow view. Exactly. And it's more, sometimes more than a physical place. I think it's where you are spiritually. And I think Jethro shows he's in a different place spiritually. He doesn't have to go through all the stuff that they went through.
He doesn't have to burn the Egypt out of it.
Yeah, he wasn't doing that. And so he didn't have to wander around in the desert. He probably picked what he wanted to do.
Yeah.
And
this Jethro, he's an interesting character.
And we talk a lot about crying out and being let out, but the more I kind of study this, the more I'm like, maybe I should be more like Jethro. How do I get like that, where I am not having to sell out to the mammon and the money of the world, and kind of
we're kind of playing both parts of that, because every one of us has Egypt inside of us that we need to come out of. Mm-hmm. But like in reality, like in the physical, we don't want to be engulfed by Egypt also. So,
right.
So it's, how do you stay separate from the beginning, yet we're already not separate from the beginning? It's kind of both sides of it there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, hopefully we're just putting some things for you to think about, and not that we are claiming to be experts or have it all figured out. And we don't have.
You couldn't tell.
And we don't have a tremendous amount of information about Jethro to say much. There's just not a lot there. Numbers 12 tells us a little bit more about the lady that he marries. And so tell us about her.
All right. And Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married, for he had married an Ethiopian woman.
So who's the he here?
He is the Jethro, right? Oh, no, Moses.
I believe it's Moses.
I'm a
yeah.
goof. No, yes, it's Moses.
So I think it's kind of interesting, which just shows that Jethro and his family, they moved around, and maybe at the time, she did live, they lived in Ethiopia for a while, but, they may have lived all over. They may have ended up in the promised land.
Yeah.
At some point.
And Ethiopia isn't really all that far from Midian.
Uh-oh.
So maybe he ran into town and got himself a wife at the well, like they do.
With the watering hole. People still do that, I think. Different kind of watering hole, though.
Yeah.
Genesis 15:14-16 in the King James.
And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterward shall they come out with great substance. And thou shalt go to thy fathers in peace, thou shalt be buried in a good old age. But in the 4th generation they shall come hither again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full.
Has this been fulfilled?
Yes, it has.
Yeah.
Well, it's like all prophecy, right? Mm-hmm. It was fulfilled, it is being fulfilled, and it will be fulfilled kind of situation. Because we have Amorites among us that we are trying to, not fall into line with. So here we're saying the 4th generation is how long they were in Egypt.
Yeah,
right?
and you and I think, look at that different. In America today, 4th generation, we don't think hundreds of years, do we?
No.
Because you might have 4 generations in your family if you have a great-grandparent.
Right.
And you have, grandchildren there. And, you could say, well, that's not that long. But
right.
I think people get confused in this scripture, and I have before too, and not understood that this is a long time.
Yeah.
And so we're going to prove that to you.
Right. And I think interesting here, if we go back there, is for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. Remember when they came out of Egypt, it was the army of Yahweh coming out of Egypt, and it was as a rod of smiting and judgment on pagan nations also. It wasn't just salvation for the Israelites. It was that too, but it was also a judgment for other nations.
Mm-hmm. And this is a timeline, just kind of showing you where Moses comes from and Jethro, and it didn't really explain the Jethro timeline. He just kind of pops out of nowhere there, but
almost like Melchizedek did.
Yes,
it just kind of popped out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm. And so then Exodus 12:40.
The length of time that the Israelites lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of the 430th year, to the very day, all the ranks of Yahweh departed from the land of Egypt.
All right, so 430, so that 4 generations becomes 430.
Right.
Why? It's because of this. They lived a long time.
Yes.
So this one kind of just, somebody did the math and just kind of shows the ages and timelines of the people, and that's how you get to 430.
Correct.
So just another proof that the word is true.
Right. And also, before that, before the 4 generations, it also says 430 years as part of the prophecy, but it's before, it's actually right around the time of the 4 generations that he talks about.
And then Moses is the grandson of Levi, and so that we've seen that. That's not hard to research there. But Jasher, the book of Jasher says that Moses had a Levi. Specifically says that. Now, see, I don't think I meant to say Levi priest, but his father is a priest,
but also from Levi. So.
Moses gets the girl by pulling the staff out of the staff out of a rock, like the sword and the stone. That's the legend that you see in the book of Jasher, where it was the same the rod and staff that he uses to part the Red Sea. He had really got that from, it was a staff that Adam and Noah had carried, and the forefathers, and eventually the last person to have it sticks it in the ground, and everyone tried to pull it out of the ground. It became like this thing. Nobody could pull it out of the ground. Moses comes up one day. He's like, oh, this thing, bloop, and it comes right up out of the ground. And
they all loosened it.
yes. And then Jethro's like, hey, you're the chosen one. Marry my daughter. So, take that for what it's worth, but that is what Jasser says, and so I just think it's worth mentioning a little bit of that possible backstory. But it also, sometimes you see these stories where, it doesn't take it's not hard to see that the sword and the stone and other legends probably, may have come out of something true that could have actually happened. So tell us about Moses.
Moses was a kind lad. No. So he spent 40 years in Egypt, 40 years in the wilderness as a shepherd, 40 years as a leader. So this is just breaking up his timeline. He's about 40 when he smites the Egyptian, and then he's 80 when he leaves to go, when they leave Egypt and head into the wilderness. And then, he's continues in the wilderness for 40 years. So.
Yeah, that's a long time, 40. A lot of people would think they were done, the midlife crisis. Many people at about 40 start going, well, I guess my life's half over. Yep. Moses was a third over, Yep. He was still going strong. So, I think it's important, for one thing, to look at Moses' life and realize that you can still be used at any point in your life. Yeah. You can be old and you can still be used.
Yeah. So. And I've heard it kind of explained in this way, like, he spent 40 years in Egypt, and it took 40 years to get the Egypt out of him, and then now he's taking 40 years to get the Egypt out of others. He's leading others, in the direction that he took also.
Yeah. It helps understand why he's humble.
Yeah.
Because he went from being, practically king of the world to nobody.
Yeah.
Pounding sand in the desert, every day. And that'll do something to you.
Yeah.
And it took a while. And also shows that, this journey we're on, it doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
This is changing slowly over time. It's kind of almost like the new wineskins things. If you did it too quickly, the wineskins would burst.
Right. Oh, you're on something. Okay.
Oh, is that it?
And that's all we know about Shemot.
Yep, that's all Shemot.
That's all Shemot. Oh, that's right. So, this picture reminds me that we should mention the burning bush, because that happens right in this section. So the burning bush is a thorn bush, right? It goes with the thorns from the wilderness, from when they leave the garden, and that's the curse on the land and on man, is that they'll work through the thorns to make their harvest and to eat from the land. And the thorn bush that is the ark of the covenant, wrapped in gold. So this is tied with sin, right?
The ram caught in the thicket.
The ram caught in the thicket. That's
probably thorns.
It's a thorn bush. And then the crown of thorns on Yeshua's head. It's all tied up in a representation of sin. And this burning bush is like Yahweh can live with us, but he would burn our thorny nature. And just as he comes to dwell in us, he burns us, but he doesn't consume us.
And the bush still looks like a bush at the end.
Yeah.
And he doesn't completely, he still allows us to be who we are.
Yeah.
Which is pretty fascinating.
But you have to go through the fire.
Yeah.
To be purified. And so I think that's interesting, if you think about it that way, that,
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting too, because we also know, there's a lot of references to potter in clay and being refined and turned into something new, and that will happen. But the burning bush also kind of shows that its identity got preserved, even though it got cleansed.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's good. All right, anything else we want to say about Shemot?
I mean, that's all I got right now.
All right. Well, bottom line is, read this stuff. Read your Bible. Read the Torah portion. Find a group of believers to do this with, even if it's your own family, even if it's a neighbor. It's not hard to find people that you can fellowship with and host them for a dinner and read the scripture together. Just have a Bible study. So
Yeah.
That's basically, it's very simple. Don't make this complicated.
Yep. Just read your portion, read the Bible, and try to pick out some stuff that strikes you. See what the Holy Spirit's talking to you about.
That's right. Well, we hope this has been meaningful and useful to you, and please share it with others. And this is Matt and Jake signing off.